Hello and welcome back to Hydroponics Daily, your go-to podcast for everything soilless cultivation. I'm your host, Dr. Russell Sharp, the owner of Utrema Limited. And at Utrema, we make a number of fertilizers, biostimulants, biofungicides, things like this, but we don't make anything made with salt or sodium-containing compounds. And that's because sodium is really toxic to plants, and I'm going to talk about how you should avoid sodium in your hydroponic setup, which is not as easy as it sounds. You're not going to be pouring salt in there unless you're growing halophytes. Halophytes are salt-loving, sodium-loving plants from the seaside and from estuaries and things like this. There are not many crops are halophytes. And so you want to avoid sodium. One of the things I used to do as a lecturer at college was get a tomato plant and sit at my desk at the front of the lecture theatre and then just put 1 teaspoon of salt on the top of the soil surface and water it in. And by the end of the lecture, in 45 minutes, 1 hour's time, the tomato plant would have keeled over and would be dead. And that was to illustrate during that lecture that sodium is one of the most toxic things you can give to a plant, probably the most toxic thing you can give to a plant. And it kills it instantly and is instantly toxic to plants. So you think about some herbicides, some weed killers that take weeks to work. Salt works instantaneously. And not only that, salt sticks around. So if you try and grow any other plant in that soil, it will be poisoned by the salt. Whereas a weed killer like glyphosate is deactivated as soon as it hits the soil. So that's a big, reason. That's a good reason to avoid salt and sodium containing compounds. But let's go into the reasons why it's so toxic. One of the main reasons people cite is osmotic stress, and that's because high salt concentrations outside the roots reduce the plant's ability to absorb water, leading to dehydration, even when there's lots of water in the soil. So this is by the process of osmosis. It increases the osmotic pressure pull coming out of the roots, and so the plants can't pull it in through osmosis, through the root cells. Now, osmotic stress is not the main reason that salt is toxic, though, even though it's the most commonly cited reason. If you think about it, sugars are osmotic agents as well, and when we put sugar compounds onto the plants as in flowering, if you're growing legal cannabis, that's very, very common. Sort of booster, hardener type products. That doesn't kill the plant, and so it can't just be due to osmotic stress. It will limit water uptake, but it won't kill the plant. You think of products like a very, very common product would be like rock resonator. If you've come across that product, full of sugars, honeycomb, in Emerald Harvest, that's another popular one. There are loads of sugar-based products, though, on the market, and they don't kill the plants. They don't contain sodium. The main reason is iron toxicity. Excess sodium, Na+, and chloride, Cl-, ions disrupt normal cellular process, damaging membranes and enzymes, and that's the main reason. It's like, I always like to say sodium is the arsenic to plants. So you wouldn't eat a sandwich containing arsenic, and the plant wouldn't eat a sandwich containing sodium. It can also lead to certain nutrient imbalances because sodium competes with essential nutrients, especially potassium and sometimes calcium and magnesium, leading to deficiencies. So if you have near the seaside, if there's a tsunami or an inundation, a storm surge, then plants and crops that have been inundated with salt water, seawater, often show signs of potassium deficiency. And then sodium will also lead to chlorosis, which is the yellowing of leaves, and necrosis, which is the dying off of tissues. Especially, it damages chloroplasts, causing the yellowing and tissue death. And it just limits growth as well. Energy is diverted to ion regulation and osmotic protection to basically the plant diverts attention to overcoming those problems, and it reduces growth, flowering, and yield. So that's the main one. And then secondary effects, salt damages the soil and can lead to compaction and degradation of the soil structure. So that can be overcome by applying calcium products, and that's where Utrema sell a lot of products into soil-based systems for that. But where is the sodium coming from in hydroponics? Because you're not going to be thinking you're going to be adding it. Well, it's coming from inferior ingredients. If you're growing with from a source that uses low-grade potassium nitrate, then it contains sodium impurities. Again, calcium nitrate can carry sodium contaminants, especially the cheap, lower purity ones. And then also, one that's not often understood by many formulators of fertilizers is that a lot of the micronutrients, a lot of the EDTA type fertilizers, if you don't choose the right one, then they contain lots of sodium. So at Utrima, we always use sodium-free micronutrient chelates, but lots and lots of companies don't. And so that will be a big source of sodium. And then sodium nitrate sometimes used as a nitrogen source in some systems, but I would always avoid it. Irrigation water, groundwater, municipal water can contain dissolved sodium as well. So always useful to clean up your water if you've got the time and money. pH adjusters, never use sodium bicarbonate or sodium hydroxide for alkalinity control. They won't be in most pH adjusters though. Most of them are potassium hydroxide. However, you will see bicarbonate of soda advertised and recommended for controlling a lot of fungal diseases. Never use sodium bicarbonate or bicarbonate of soda because the sodium will be toxic to your plants. The bicarbonate is toxic to the fungus. Always use potassium bicarbonate. The potassium will provide a nutrient. The bicarb will control the fungus. If you're growing in cocoa, in coconut fiber, then there is a real possibility that you could be getting sodium toxicity from your grow media. Coconuts grow near the sea on saline soils, and they can contain a lot of sodium. And to overcome this, good grow media is buffered and soaked in calcium nitrate to remove the sodium. Calcium is really good at removing sodium. It leaches it out. However, poor quality, cheap grow media where they've cut corners, you could still get residual sodium, and then this can appear on your plants when you're doing it. The other source is recycled nutrient solutions, reusing solutions without adequate monitoring them. If you reuse growing media, again, you could do this. And then also organic fertilizers, anything that's created from waste food material, sort of digestates and things like this. Yes, they might be organic. Yes, they might be not vegetarian, but they could contain salt because we put salt in food. And then when it goes to the digestate, to the composter, the composting process, the anaerobic digestion process, either one that's being used, doesn't remove the salt. And so they can be a source of salt. And even seaweed extracts contain some small amount of sodium. However, it's normally quite low, the sodium content of seaweed extracts. Some people might say sodium is a plant nutrient and plants need it, but there's always enough contaminants of sodium around. You don't need to worry ever about adding sodium. So the best formulators don't use sodium and use very high grade purity ingredients. And then the cheap and cheerful ones, you might get some sodium levels in there. So just be aware of that. But for the same reason, never ever try and kill slugs and snails by putting salt on them, because they will poison your garden by doing that. And never put them on your driveway, because again, you could put them on your driveway. It could wash into your garden. There could be an issue there. So always better to use a approved method to kill slugs and snails. And for weeds, never use them to control weeds in your garden. Some people we often get reports like people phoning up and saying that they've killed slugs or they've killed weeds with salt and now their garden doesn't grow. What can I do? So for that, we recommend applying our liquid gypsum product, which soaks in and dissipates the sodium, but it's not really one for hydroponics. In hydroponics, it's best to avoid it in the first place. In arid regions or regions where there's low water availability, then desalination plants will be providing the water, and often you can grow plants in water with higher salt levels than would be tolerated with drinking water. And so there will always be a residual problem with salinity in those sorts of areas. And so something you have to deal with, and might be you'd have to choose your crops accordingly. So desalination plants are used to grow crops in many regions of the world, like Morocco and the Middle East, and even places that you would think we've got loads of water. think we might even have a desalination plant in the UK down in Cornwall, even though it rains all the time here. So yes, desalination will remove some sodium, but it won't remove all the sodium. And so you'll have issues there. And certainly in North Africa, there's issues, and India particularly. The use of sodium-rich water for irrigation of fields has made many areas unsuitable for growing crops. Now in India, there are places where you can't grow cereal crops, but you can grow ornamental plants because they are more tolerant to the sodium levels. But something you have to understand is that once the water's evaporated, the sodium remains. And so if you're constantly irrigating in areas with high levels of evaporation, then you'll just get sodium buildup and you could ruin your farmland by doing that. And then in these regions, that's one of the reasons why they've moved to hydroponics as well, because you can't use the land because it's been too enriched with sodium. So something to consider. Places like Israel, where they grow samphire, obviously that's extremely tolerant of salt, so that will grow in the regions where they've messed up the soil, to put it lightly. Okay, so that's been Hydroponics Daily for today. The reasons why sodium is poisonous and where you might get issues with it. Why not have a look on the side of some of the additive ingredients you use in your hydroponic grow and see if sodium is an ingredient in them. You might be surprised. Some of them might contain high levels of sodium, and if so, you might want to look for an alternative. If you have used a sodium-based product and you thought it was fantastic, then let me know. I just thought of one. One very common source of sodium is in insecticidal soaps. They contain the cheap ones, well, not even the cheap ones. A lot of them contain sodium-based surfactants, and this is just stupid. At Utrema, we use potassium and magnesium and a variety of other cation-based surfactants to avoid sodium. So we always keep sodium out of even our soap-based products. But the cheap ones will contain sodium dodecyl sulfate or sodium lauryl sulfate, sodium lauryl ether sulfate. There's loads of them, but a lot of them contain sodium. And then I was going to say, the cheap and cheerful ones, but there are a lot of expensive hydroponic plant washes and insecticidal soaps that contain sodium, and that will be a problem because you're applying them as a foliar spray. And so when you see a lot of people saying, this is the lights, spray this with the lights off because the lights might harm it, when it could be that it's just because the sodium content in that wash is causing the issue. So yeah, I don't know why so many formulators do it, because it's not like formulating with an alternative is that much more expensive, but maybe they've got shareholders and they have to shave the pennies and increase the profit margin wherever they can. At Utrema, as I'm the founder and owner, I can do what's best for the plants and best for your crop and best for you, rather than actually what's best for the bank balance, and produce a better product for the same price. So check your ingredients, especially your insecticidal soaps, any pest and disease control products. See if they contain sodium, and if you want help looking for an alternative, let me know. That's been Hydroponics Daily for today. Thank you very much for listening. It's the weekend, and I shall see you tomorrow. Goodbye.